us today, and what does define in terms of our soul when we talk about Europe? Europe in the last century was the victim of extreme ideologies, and in the last century millions of people suffered. Many of them died as a result of those extreme ideologies. And we need to think about why the founders of Europe decided on a European Union. Because there are cultural differences. There are different ideologies still. And yet, why would you set up a European Union if you weren't about to deal with those ideologies that crippled Europe in the last century? And I think if we don't, in the Conference of the Future of Europe, don't deal with that properly, then we don't need a European Union. We just go back to 27, 28, or whatever number of countries and let each fight their own ideology out. And we go back to a place which caused the carnage of the last century. And I think there's a little bit of us forgetting that. So I agree with President von der Leyen when she talks about learning some fundamental lessons. The first one, it highlighted the importance of press freedom. And can I say, I spent 7 years on the Irish National Council for Press. And I have to say it was one of the most learning experiences, because I learned from the editors and the people and the journalists who write the newspapers, their perspective, but I also learned from the public perspective who received the news. And you know, you really do have to ask the question, how do you define press freedom? Secondly, it reveals that even in the EU, these rights are fragile. We've seen that time and time again. And thirdly, the group of you here, many of you come from civil society organizations. It often falls to civil society organizations to fight for the kind of freedoms that we treasure, that we believe in. When you think about it from a journalistic perspective, the fact is that in the EU, since 2015, some 16 journalists were murdered. It's an extraordinary figure in the EU. You think this belongs to the third world or to countries where law and order doesn't matter. But as you can see, law and order has its fragile times in our European Union, despite all its values and despite all its protections. So equally shocking are the increasingly verbal, physical threats, some of them even delivered from a legal perspective. And I think that changes the kind of freedom that our media and our journalists, particularly the print journalists, have to live with on a daily basis. Because let's face it, if you're a journalist, you're also a human being. You have family, you have people you love. And if there are insidious threats, whatever they are, coming into your home, that affects you. You're a human being. And the question you have to ask as a journalist, are you enjoying the protections that you need to? Because you do need higher protections than the normal citizen, because you are more vulnerable. And it is a real question that I hope that this panel will look at as we go through the day. And then on the other side, journalists have to live with their paymasters. So you have increasingly, in the modern capitalist age, for want of a better word, monopolies beginning to form. And that, in a sense, gives direction to journalists as well, that they cannot ignore. And if you live where I live, beside the United Kingdom, through the Brexit referendum, it was extraordinary how the leading owners of newspaper industry in particular led that Brexit. And it was extraordinary to have to sit and view on a daily basis the absolute lies and fake news that were told during that referendum. And perpetrated, I have to say, by a print media that was clearly not even apologetic as to the interest that was driving it. So I suppose I'm outlining two fundamental difficulties faced by ordinary journalists. One, the threats and all of that, and in some cases loss of life. And two, threats to their livelihood, because if a newspaper has a particular perspective linking to its owner, well then that's what you must report. And that is a major challenge for modern journalists of today. I suppose looking at the way forward, we in the European Economic Social Committee produced a really good opinion, Securing Media Freedom and Diversity in Europe. Rapporteur was Mr. Christian Moos of Germany, who is a member of my group. And at the starting point, we must agree, and in this opinion, that the EU has a moral obligation to enforce EU values functioning liberal democracies and the rule of law. And perhaps now more than ever, European institutions and civil society organizations need to take up that challenge. Because, as I said, the journalists and the media who really believe in freedom need that protection. And they need more protection than the normal citizen because of that. Some of those key recommendations really looked at how do you deal with media literacy in terms of our population. Someone mentioned earlier on the millennium, the famous poor old millennium. I have a couple of kids in that bracket, and they don't like that heading at all. They don't like being called millennials. So those of you who are in that bracket, my apologies. As if you were some sort of different species, but you're not. You're also affected by the media that comes in front of you. And of course, social media is the big one. So how do we manage media literacy in our education systems? We really have to look at that. We really have to say that we cannot just expect it to happen naturally. We have to ask ourselves, if we're a part of this European Union, if its values are important to us, then we have got to ask ourselves, well, what are we doing about at least teaching and bringing knowledge to all young people who have to deal with such a multifaceted platform of media at the moment. Another thing we recommended in that opinion was a ban on strategic lawsuits against public participation, otherwise known as SLAPs. These aim to censor, intimidate, or silence media through legal costs or, as I said, simply fear. That particular mechanism, SLAPs, should have no place in the European Union if we really believe in freedoms. Another recommendation, and this is key, is that the EU must support impartial national public broadcasting companies. I'm just wondering, do we have any impartial public broadcasting companies? Maybe you can answer that question, the experts, later on. Because really, you do have to look far and wide to find the pub. We all know in the United States, it's pretty clear. You have Fox News and you have CNN. Okay, that's it. You know, you don't have to figure out which is which or what's what. You just know one is completely right-wing and the other one has gone very much to the other side, probably forced by Fox. But at least you know, if you look at one of them, that's where you stand, probably. Whereas I remember I was in Mississippi in the year of Trump, during the campaign, when I discovered I should have put a bet on it, because I was told in no uncertain terms Trump was going to win that election. And coming from, you know, liberal Europe and all of that, I thought, this is nuts. There's no way Trump can win the election. And most of us in Europe thought that. But my heavens, if you were in that southern part of the United States during August, which I was in that year, it was pretty obvious. There was only one media, there was only one print, and it was all Trump. And don't tell me that didn't influence how that election worked out. It was extraordinary. We also said that the EU must incentivize the creation of national transparency registers, for example, on contacts between politicians and media entrepreneurs. We really need to be sure, has the media or are the media connected to the entrepreneurs or to the other ideological parts of the industry, not just entrepreneurs. It's to do with where are you getting your content and who is influencing that content. And I think that's in our recommendation. And finally, it is recommended in the report that further EC annual reports on the rule of law in member states should automatically include a section on the state of media freedom and plurality. So I hope you get to see that opinion, because it really at least begins the discussion and the debate about how you would have the kind of media freedom that we need in order to get educated and be influenced in our daily lives, because we do need to make really important decisions as to who we vote for, as to what values we stand for. And those values matter in our daily lives, as we've seen in the video. As the lady from Spain made it very clear, she said emphatic or empathetic. We must be empathetic to the sufferings of people. And certainly at the table I was last night, I was learning a great deal about what it is for just normal families. So just normal families managing through COVID, through the pandemics, and through the various threats. As a closing remark, I would like to express two aspirations as well. So this is a challenge to the media. The first is that journalism in Europe will come to be valued and supported for what it really is, a public good. It should be a public good. You cannot have it any other way. And if it's a public good, then it must have the enforcement necessary for the creation of a public good. The second is that the greater media protection and diversity should become a focus point both for the discussions and the recommendations of the Conference of the Future of Europe. If the Conference of the Future of Europe delivers some strange kind of Europe that none of us recognise, then, it's not just Brexit, it's all exit at this stage. I have a kind of a personal belief as well, and I'm asking our journalist colleagues in this House and indeed abroad and in wider, is that we really want you, from a civil society perspective, to report on the much work that we do in civil society, whether it's fighting freedoms, whether it's just delivering services during the COVID lockdown. I know in Ireland, my own organisation was on the ground every single day. And across Europe, we held a conference at Diversity Europe last March where we showed what civil society organisations were doing on a daily basis. And we really would ask the media to look at that and at least recognise that as well. So my conclusion is, I'd like to thank Killian and the staff and all of the people who have organised this conference so well. The evening was just as important as yesterday and today. I would like to thank the panellists that I've listened to so far, and of course will again, and for you for listening to me. So after that, thank you and enjoy the rest of the day.
Well done, and thank you, Seamus. Very inspirational words there. And I think you touched upon the issue of trust in particular. And we've seen that eroding over a number of years. We've seen it eroding, first of all, maybe trust in institutions, the trust people had after the financial crisis in 2008, of the reaction to that. And I think the trust started to be lost in those who were governing us and making decisions. Perhaps that's been compounded because at the time, certainly in Ireland and in other member states, the message we were told was, we have to take this route of austerity and there's no other option and nothing else works and there's no alternative and there's no discussion to be had on that. Now we face another financial crisis as a result of COVID, and we're told, well, actually, there's another way we can go. We can use stimulus packages and we can borrow our way out of it, and we can go this other approach. And I think, if anything, that may further enhance the mistrust in those who are providing leadership and making decisions. And it's a real challenge because although we're here in this room engaged, an increasing number of citizens are disengaging from both the institutions, from decision-making, and as a consequence, I think that there was a conscious effort to erode citizens' trust in journalism and in the media. And we saw that by new outlets coming up, the opportunities that were there through social media to undermine one of the great institutions that we always trusted, that being journalism. And we've seen it throughout the years that a good investigative journalist could bring down a government or could really turn things in a particular direction. And now there's so much noise in that space that it's difficult. Every time I read an article on something now, I feel I have to go and do my own research to find out, well, who wrote it and where are they coming from. And there's always, you can read almost any factual piece online, and then you put it into the search engine and write debunked after it, and you'll read the complete opposite of how it's fake news. And it's very difficult, and people don't have the time or, after a while, even the interest to do your own research on everything. And we see that with COVID, I think. You can find just as much information on how masks make no difference and don't work as you can find information on how it's the responsible, right thing to do. And we had that discussion yesterday, how people have hijacked the word freedom to justify their anti-establishment behaviour against collective action that's designed for the greater good. And it's astonishing to me in the circles I move that people who are all for a particular set of values in response to the climate crisis, many of those same people are now in a category where they're kind of anti-COVID, if you like, or they're anti the measures that are being taken to deal with COVID. And it becomes so confusing and so difficult to find what the truth is between all of this, that the place we've always turned to is to journalism for that, where people, professionals, do the investigation and present you the facts in a digestible way that we can understand. Because a lot of the work that we do within the institutions is in an institutional language that excludes everyday citizens from being able to understand the nuances of what's happening. And so we often there rely on journalism to give us what the true picture is. So given all of that, I think this morning's panel is a really important, interesting one for us to conclude the discussions we had yesterday. And with that, I'd like to hand over to our moderator for this panel. Just before COVID hit, I think, Bruno, was the last time we worked together, and little did we know what was ahead or that it would be so long before I saw you again. But I'm delighted that you're moderating our panel today, and I'd now like to give you the floor to Bruno Kaufmann.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this third and last panel here of the seminar of the Economic and Social Committee. And as Kilian already has introduced, you got the task last night to dream about Europe during the night, but now we want to start to dream about during the day as well. And for this, we have this Slido tool where you get some questions where you can enter your answers. Do you think that the EU should impose financial sanctions on member states which fail to respect the rule of law? Please take up your Slido and vote. Yes, that's a not very contested vote, obviously, but there are some people having some doubts. Yeah. Okay, I think everybody has voted. It's a clear 2/3 majority or 3/4 of a majority for this proposal of financial sections. Is there a second question here coming up? No? Just one question. Okay. One question in one step. Yes, I'm Bruno Kaufmann. I'm the moderator of this morning's conversation, and European democracy has been really a key issue for me all my life. As a teenager growing up in Switzerland, we always took the night trains to places like Budapest, Prague, and East Berlin to meet young people which had much less possibilities and freedoms as we had. And as a young journalist then in the late 80s, I was sent to the Baltic countries, to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, to follow their fight for freedom, for democracy. And in fact, since then, as the correspondent for the Swiss Broadcasting Company, and now since about 5 years as the global democracy correspondent for the Swiss Broadcasting Company, I have really had the opportunity to follow these fights not only in Europe but also around the world. And I was just yesterday in Kiev in the Ukraine and met with journalists who were working for basically one of the last independent newspapers there, the Kiev Post, which was sacked just 1 week ago because the owner of the newspaper, which is an oligarch, he wanted to change this paper into a megaphone for his business interests. And that's an issue which in the Ukraine is a big, big issue that basically all media has been not put into the interest of certain politicians, but into the interest of certain oligarchs. But these challenges to press freedom as a core for democracy is really, I would say, quite universal. Even in my home country, Switzerland, there has been a new law adopted by Parliament recently, which makes it much easier for individuals and businesses to go to the courts and to forbid publication of sensitive articles about their interests. And in fact, we had a few years ago also a proposal by certain groups to abolish the fee system for public broadcasting. Today, every Swiss household has to pay about 400 euro a year for the public broadcasting system as an infrastructure for democracy. And I must say, at the time, 3 years ago, luckily, 72% of the Swiss voters said, no, we want to keep this system. And I think that was, at that time, a very good sign, of course. But it's not something which just lasts, because already now there are new proposals to attack the system again. And I think it's really a key that we are discussing free press, free media as a key infrastructure element of democracy, of European democracy. And this morning we are now together here with this eminent lineup of journalists from all over Europe, focusing on the role of free press as the key ingredient of this democratic infrastructure. And we will doing so by spotlighting the issue of freedom of expression from really different parts, from different countries, from different organizations, also from different angles. And as Seamus Boland has said it's really a very serious issue when it comes to freedom of press. On Monday, the Global State of Democracy report will be published by International IDEA, and it shows very clearly that the countries where freedom of press, freedom of expression is under high pressure has increased in recent years from very few countries to many countries around the world. And in fact, now also 48% of the people lived in autocracies of the world in 2010. Now it's 68%. Of course, one major reason for that is that India has become from the biggest, or has been labeled the biggest democracy. Now it's the second biggest autocracy. And also, as Seamus has said, one of the most shocking developments in recent years have been the attacks and the killing of journalists around Europe as well, and of course around the world. And you will see here pictures about that. And we have with us a fellow journalist that has experienced this violence directly. Matthew Caruana Galicia lost his mother, investigative journalist Daphne Caruana Galicia, in 2017. She was assassinated following the investigations into corruption in Malta. And Matthew, who is himself an investigative journalist and has worked on the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers, is now director of the Daphne Caruana Galicia Foundation. And you are working on the case surrounding your mother's killing. You have lost your mother in one of the most shocking journalist murders in recent European history. And after her death, you and your family have been fighting tirelessly to tackle impunity, bring the perpetrators to justice, and making sure this does not happen again. So I would like to invite you to tell us what this devastating experience has meant to you. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. It goes without saying that the past couple of years have been extremely difficult, but it didn't start with my mother's murder. It actually started before that, because when you look back, it seems as though her murder was entirely predictable. The threats against her were increasing as she got closer to the truth about the corruption that she was investigating in Malta, surrounding an energy deal and various privatization deals. Government officials were using defamation suits. They were acting together with people in business to create what are called strategic lawsuits against public participation, SLAPs. It's the strategic use of defamation suits to not just stop a particular journalist from continuing their investigation into something and eat up all their resources, but also to deter others. So these lawsuits send a message to other journalists that if they dare touch upon these issues, the same thing will be done to them. And it actually works, because journalists do not really work individually nowadays. They depend on the solidarity of other journalists, either working as collaborative groups of investigative journalists, or for kind of editorial solidarity. I mean, you publish an investigative report and other journalists continue your work or kind of back it up with their own investigative work. But strategic lawsuits are designed to stop exactly this. And this is what my mother was experiencing in the last few years of her life. So when other journalists continued her investigations, they were also attacked and they caved in. They withdrew their stories, deleted the articles. But my mother didn't. She continued up to the point where she had almost 50 defamation suits which had been filed against her at the time of her murder. 19 of them by a single business figure who depended on deals with the government. What we discovered immediately before and after the murder was that there was active coordination with government officials. Government officials were encouraging business figures to file defamation suits. Business figures were asking government officials whether they should go ahead and sue my mother, sort of as a favor to the officials who were ensuring that they got lucrative deals with government. So there was a real increase in this kind of threat, in this kind of legal harassment against her in the last years of her life. But public institutions were not prepared to do anything about it. The European Union was aware that this was happening in Malta, but simply considered it an annoying little matter of sort of low-level national concern, and not really as a threat to European democracy. And after my mother's murder, the message that we sent to Commission officials was, look, if this is not stopped, it's simply going to spread from Malta to the rest of the European Union. And in fact, this is what is happening now. Strategic lawsuits are being used to silence journalists in Poland, Croatia, Slovenia. It's spread across the entire European Union and really become a kind of emergency situation where journalists are completely unable to do their work. Since the murder, I have 3 brothers, and together with other members of my mother's family and my father, we've embarked on this campaign for immediate justice for my mother's murder, to make sure that the people who ordered the murder and who executed those orders are convicted, but also for wider justice, which means justice for her investigations into corruption. We're still, it seems, due to inadequacies in the way corruption is investigated, in the way it's prosecuted, in the way it's handled by the judiciary, both in Malta, I mean, also at a European level and within other EU member states. We still seem to be a long way off from that. But also to ensure that this stops happening to other journalists in Europe, and that other murders like my mother's are avoided. Unfortunately, this happened only a few months after my mother's murder. Jan Kuciak and his fiancée were murdered in Slovakia. And I think that it was after this that European institutions really began to take note. And even though, as a result of the campaign that we're working on together with other international NGOs like the European Federation of Journalists, Reporters Without Borders, Committee to Protect Journalists, Article 19, we have made progress, and I believe now we're on the same page with European institutions. But still not enough has been done. We still have a long way to go with respect to making legal harassment of journalists and activists impossible, but also with respect to the effectiveness of national authorities when it comes to fighting corruption and organized crime. Our national authorities across the entire European Union are really ineffective at fighting cross-border crime and corruption. And we see this in the extremely low frequency with which these kinds of cases are prosecuted. Journalists expose cases of corruption, money laundering, cross-border organized crime over and over again. And very few of these exposés lead to actual prosecution. This is a situation which we really need to tackle.
Sharing. I mean, what you are telling to us is about this reaction which happened, but where, as you said, the reaction is still so weak. I mean, you said first it was said Malta is a small country, you're a special case, but you say
a small country is no excuse. If anything, it should make things easier.
Yeah, sure.
Because one thing that we always found shocking is that in a country where if someone steals your wallet, you can drive 20 minutes and find them, you know, just hanging out on the street or hanging out in a bar, and police often find it quite easy to catch people in this way because it's an island. You can't really go very far. We were having such a hard time finding the people who murdered my mother. And in the end, it was because the government was so wholly captured by organized criminal groups that our government had effectively been turned into a criminal organization. And this is why it was difficult for us to get justice. not because of the structural problems that come with governing a small country.
Sure. And in your journalistic work, what has this investigative approach, which is so important, and you have been now involved in this common investigative approaches to the Panama Paper, Paradise Papers, do you see that journalists around Europe are working together more and more on that?
Yes, I mean, collaborative journalism has increased the effectiveness of journalism in general. So, my mother was a journalist for 30 years, and I grew up, I mean, in journalism. I mean, journalism is a job that kind of consumes your life. And so any person who's a part of your life kind of lives it with you. And that was my experience, I mean, growing up with my mother. In the past, journalism was done in a very kind of... each journalist had their own sources and they guarded them very closely. They were not keen to collaborate so much. Collaboration was kind of structurally difficult as well. I mean, before the internet, how do you exchange data? It was quite hard to do that. If a source comes to you with a box of documents, I mean, what are you going to do? Sort of photocopy them all, send them to different journalists around Europe? There were some cases that where this was done, like with the Pentagon Papers, for example. But it's not very practical. The tools, the kind of software that journalists have at their disposal now, and the ease with which we can communicate with each other across borders has made us very effective. Unfortunately, our authorities have not caught up with this, and the tools that national authorities have for collaborating with each other to investigate crime are still stuck in Victorian times, really. When police forces want to exchange evidence with each other, they need to send rogatory letters or kind of forms that they fill out and send to the other police force. It's an extremely antiquated system. There's a lot of mistrust between police forces, and because of this, vital cases are not investigated. So I think national authorities and policymakers have a lot to learn from the way investigative journalists are doing their work. Unfortunately, because we have become so effective, it means that we are the ones who are targeted, because the people we're investigating, and this was the case with my mother, have no particular need to target police officers or to target judges or to target prosecutors, because they are simply less effective than journalists. So, unfortunately, the kind of burden of the threat of violent reprisal falls on our shoulders.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and I think this is also giving us, of course, here in this room and in this context also the big question: what can we together, what can the EU do to support, to enable a free press, freedom of expression? And I mean, there has been and are many crises, as we have heard, on different levels. I mean, the most recent one, the health crisis, which also have shown in many ways that national governments fall back on their own, and it's very hard to cooperate. And the question is, of course, also which is the picture of how journalism, how freedom of press is developing around Europe and around the world. And for this, we have now two authoritative guests here who can give us a full picture of the situation and also explain what's being done and what cannot be done at the EU level, but maybe at the global level. So I want to welcome Julie Meyer-Chuck, is the head of the Brussels office of Reporters Without Borders, the leading press freedom NGO. And also Anthony Bélanger is the General Secretary of the International Federations of Journalists, the world's largest journalist organization representing more than 600,000 journalists in 150 countries. Your organizations are on the front line of the monitoring process to freedom and flagging up threats to journalists and inside, outside the European Union. Can you paint us a little bit of a picture of the kind of threats that journalists are exposed to in this time of growing hostility towards mainstream media, and tell us what you think of the different EU initiatives you have already heard to support press freedom. Will they be enough for journalists to practice their profession freely and safely? Julie, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm going to speak in my native language, which is French, and I will, like that, reflect the diversity of Europe. Donc, je passe au français. Je vous laisse le temps de mettre vos écouteurs. Déjà, je voudrais vous remercier le Conseil économique et social européen de m'avoir invité dans ce panel et vous remercier encore plus d'avoir choisi de consacrer ce panel à la question de la liberté de la presse. Vous allez me dire, c'est un peu normal puisque je suis la représentante de Reporters sans frontières et donc c'est mon job, mais ça va bien au-delà. Parce que ce n'est pas simplement un hasard si je travaille pour Reporters sans frontières et si j'ai été pendant plus de 15 ans journaliste. Je pense vraiment que la liberté de la presse, que le journalisme indépendant, libre et rigoureux sont absolument essentiels et même consubstantiels à la démocratie et que nous tous, citoyens, nous avons besoin de journalistes pour rappeler les faits, pour dénoncer les abus, pour demander des comptes à nos gouvernants, à ceux qui nous gouvernent, qui sont censés œuvrer pour l'intérêt général, mais on sait bien que dans les faits, ce n'est pas toujours comme cela que ça se passe. Ceux qui ont le pouvoir ont tendance à en abuser, ceux qui ont de l'argent aussi. Et le rôle des journalistes, c'est de mettre en lumière leurs agissements, ce qu'ils font, ce qu'ils ne font pas, ce qu'ils veulent nous cacher. Il faut des journalistes indépendants pour publier des informations qui dérangent, des informations compromettantes. Et si les journalistes ne sont plus libres de jouer leur rôle de chien de garde de la démocratie, alors il n'y a plus de limite au pouvoir politique et au pouvoir économique. Et c'est la porte ouverte à tous les abus, à la corruption et à l'arbitraire. Donc nous avons besoin d'une information libre et indépendante pour pouvoir faire des choix en connaissance de cause, pour pouvoir voter en connaissance de cause. Et sans la liberté de la presse, la démocratie n'est plus qu'une façade. Et ça me semble important de vous rappeler cela à un moment donné où le journalisme traverse une crise, même plusieurs crises, mais en particulier une crise de confiance qui traverse et qui menace nos démocraties. Aujourd'hui, la liberté de la presse est de plus en plus malmenée en Europe et on n'en a pas forcément toujours conscience. Alors, c'est vrai que l'Union européenne reste la région du monde la plus sûre pour les journalistes et les professionnels des médias, la zone qui défend le mieux la liberté de la presse. C'est important de le dire, mais il est aussi extrêmement important de dire et de souligner que les journalistes font face à des menaces croissantes au sein de l'Union européenne et qu'ils sont de plus en plus entravés dans leur travail. Alors on a dit, mais je voudrais quand même le redire, le fait le plus marquant, le plus choquant de ces 4-5 dernières années, c'est l'assassinat de journalistes dans l'Union européenne. C'est sans précédent. Daphne Caruana Galizia à Malte en 2017 et puis moins de 5 mois plus tard, celui de Jan Kuciak et de sa fiancée en 2018 en Slovaquie, 2 journalistes d'investigation qui ont été délibérément ciblés pour leur travail de dénonciation de la corruption. Et puis tout récemment, un journaliste grec, Georgios Karavaz et Peter De Vries aux Pays-Bas ont également été assassinés. Cela doit nous interroger sur l'état de nos démocraties. Dans les 10 années qui ont précédé l'assassinat de Daphne Caruana Galizia, Reporters sans frontières avait documenté 4 cas de journalistes assassinés dans l'UE. Malheureusement, ces assassinats ne sont que la partie émergée de l'iceberg. Les journalistes sont soumis à de nombreuses et multiples formes d'intimidation et de pression, des violences verbales et physiques, du harcèlement en ligne, du harcèlement judiciaire, les fameux slaps dont Mathieu a parlé juste avant moi, des interpellations, des détentions arbitraires, une surveillance illégale, on l'a vu avec le scandale Pegasus, des violences sexistes et sexuelles que subissent les femmes journalistes. En Italie, Roberto Saviano, mais aussi Paolo Borrometti et une vingtaine de journalistes vivent actuellement sous protection policière 24 heures sur 24. Je voudrais aussi parler de certains pays où la mainmise du pouvoir sur les médias a atteint un degré sans précédent. Et je pense en particulier à la Hongrie, mais aussi à la Pologne, où les situations sont inquiétantes. Dans ces deux pays, les médias publics sont devenus des outils de propagande au service du parti au pouvoir, au lieu d'être au service du public. Les médias privés sont rachetés par des hommes d'affaires proches du pouvoir. Quand ils ne sont pas rachetés par ces oligarques, ils sont étranglés financièrement ou ils se voient refuser le renouvellement de leur licence. Et les journalistes critiques sont, eux, régulièrement accusés d'être des traîtres à la patrie, des agents de l'étranger. La situation est aussi particulièrement inquiétante en Bulgarie, qui est dans le classement mondial de la liberté de la presse que Reporters sans frontières publie chaque année, et le plus mauvais pays, le plus mauvais élève. Il occupe la 112e position sur 180 pays. Et là aussi, les journalistes sont quotidiennement intimidés et font l'objet de violences, à la fois de la part d'oligarques et aussi des pressions de la part de l'État. Alors, si on veut que l'Union européenne reste la région qui garantit le mieux la liberté de la presse, reste cette région où le meurtre des journalistes sont une exception et où les journalistes peuvent faire leur travail en sécurité, alors l'Union européenne ne peut pas rester les bras croisés et elle doit agir. Et agir, c'est d'abord condamner publiquement et au plus haut niveau les attaques contre les journalistes, y compris quand elles viennent du sommet de l'État, comme on l'a vu récemment en Slovénie, qui occupe en ce moment la présidence de l'Union européenne, où le Premier ministre se livre régulièrement à des attaques inacceptables, à des attaques verbales inacceptables sur Twitter. Mais agir, c'est surtout se doter des outils adéquats pour faire respecter la liberté et le pluralisme des médias. Alors, la Commission commence à prendre conscience du problème. Elle a instauré deux nouveaux outils. Le premier, c'est le rapport annuel sur l'état de droit, qui comprend notamment un chapitre consacré aux médias. Alors ça, c'était un pas en avant que nous avons salué et qu'il faut souligner, car c'est la première fois que la Commission inclut de manière aussi directe la liberté de la presse dans la notion de droit, d'état de droit, et c'était extrêmement important. La présidente de la Commission européenne, von der Leyen, a annoncé dans son discours sur l'état de l'Union mi-septembre que dorénavant, ce rapport, qui est en fait un état des lieux, serait suivi de recommandations pays par pays, ce que Reporters sans frontières demandait depuis le départ. Donc là encore, c'est un nouveau bon pas en avant, mais il reste une dernière étape à accomplir, et une étape extrêmement importante, qui est que ce qu'on fait si ces recommandations ne sont pas suivies et si les violations de la liberté de la presse demeurent. Et donc, depuis le départ, nous demandons, et nous ne sommes pas les seuls, nous demandons qu'il y ait des sanctions lorsque les recommandations ne sont pas prises en compte et lorsque des violations graves subsistent. La deuxième innovation, ou le deuxième outil que l'Union européenne a adopté, c'est des recommandations sur la sécurité des journalistes. Elles ont été publiées mi-septembre. Là aussi, c'est une bonne chose. Leur contenu est assez similaire des recommandations du Conseil de l'Europe, mais malheureusement, c'est des recommandations, ce qui veut dire qu'elles ne sont pas juridiquement contraignantes et que donc elles ne permettront d'améliorer concrètement la situation des journalistes que si les États membres les mettent en œuvre. Et donc, on est encore dépendant de la bonne volonté des États membres Et c'est là où il me semble qu'il y a encore beaucoup à faire pour faire respecter la liberté de la presse et le pluralisme des médias, pour que cela ne soit pas laissé au bon vouloir des États membres. La liberté de la presse est une valeur européenne. Elle fait partie des États membres qui ont adhéré à l'Union européenne, ont accepté ces valeurs européennes, et donc elles doivent être respectées, et elles doivent être respectées grâce à des outils que l'Union européenne se dote. Des États comme la Pologne ou la Hongrie ne peuvent pas décider simplement de bénéficier de fonds européens. Ils doivent prendre tout le paquet européen, les valeurs y compris. La Commission a annoncé 2 autres initiatives pour 2022. D'abord, des mesures anti-SLAPP. Donc, je ne vais pas redévelopper ce que c'est. En français, on appelle ça des procédures bâillons. C'est une pratique qui se répand effectivement de plus en plus à travers l'Europe pour intimider les journalistes, les empêcher, en les menaçant de procès, les empêcher de continuer leurs enquêtes, de publier leurs articles. Et donc, la Commission a annoncé qu'elle allait proposer des mesures en 2022, des mesures anti-SLAPP à l'échelle de l'Union européenne. Alors, ce que je voudrais souligner, c'est que ce qui est très important, c'est évidemment que l'Union européenne s'attaque aux SLAPP qui ont un caractère transfrontalier, mais aussi qu'elle prenne en compte les cas nationaux. Parce que les cas nationaux sont quand même la majorité des cas qu'on observe aujourd'hui. Donc voilà, nous attendons beaucoup du travail de la Commission sur ce sujet-là. L'autre initiative, c'est le European Media Freedom Act, que la présidente de la Commission européenne a confirmé lors de son discours sur l'état de l'Union. On a encore assez peu d'idées, enfin pas d'idées, mais plutôt de vision de ce qu'il y aura dans ce European de Media Freedom Act, pardon. C'est à notre avis l'opportunité, l'occasion unique de pouvoir répondre avec des outils efficaces et qui répondent aux différents problèmes qu'on voit aujourd'hui, aux différentes violations, et qui ne trouvent pas de solution parce que l'Union n'a pas justement les outils adéquats. Donc pour nous, il faut vraiment que la Commission soit ambitieuse et que cette fois-ci, elle ne passe pas par des recommandations, mais par des actes juridiques qui soient contraignants pour les États membres. Von der Leyen a dit que l'information était un bien public, public good. Je suis entièrement d'accord avec ça, mais si c'est un public good, alors il faut des règles particulières, puisque ce ne sont pas des marchandises. La presse n'est pas une marchandise comme les autres. Un dernier point, et puis après je vais m'arrêter parce que je pense que je parle depuis déjà un certain temps. Un mot sur la régulation des plateformes, qui est aussi un enjeu capital, puisque aujourd'hui nous voyons qu'effectivement on est dans ce qu'on appelle à RSF un chaos informationnel. Où règnent des algorithmes qui favorisent le sensationnalisme, les rumeurs, la haine, le mensonge, où les opinions et les croyances l'emportent sur les faits. Et il y a une sorte de désavantage compétitif qui est donné aux journalistes par rapport à ces autres contenus. Et donc, à RSF, nous plaidons pour inverser cette logique qui désavantage injustement le journalisme et pour obliger les plateformes à promouvoir des sources d'informations fiables. Et donc, nous demandons à ce que le DSA oblige les plateformes à promouvoir ces sources d'informations fiables. Nous avons mis en place une norme qui en fait reprend les méthodes journalistiques et l'éthique journalistique, qui a été mis au point avec la profession et que nous appelons la Journalism Trust Initiative, et qui pourrait utilement contribuer à permettre de s'y retrouver dans ce chaos informationnel et à redonner un avantage au journalisme digne de confiance. Voilà, je vais m'arrêter là. Je voudrais juste finir en vous disant une phrase qu'on dit souvent à RSF, qu'il faut défendre l'information avant qu'on en soit privé.
Thank you, Julie. You gave us a really good overview about what's going on, which kind of initiatives are there. And also in this discussion always, I mean, myself, I've worked as a journalist for 35 years. It's not like that things have been much better before than they are today. It's in a way that we are in a total different situation with the, you can say, globalization, transnationalization, digitization. We have to reinvent the ramifications for the press and for the media in a new way. And also you can say that, I mean, the idea of a paternalistic political system we were growing up to, this is questioned by many ways. And I mean, these issues you are addressing about having European tools of sanctioning, of having a real Freedom Act and also regulating the platforms, they are, of course, maybe timely initiatives where I think the key issue also is to have a conversation about the benefits and maybe the perils of many of these tools, because freedoms are only freedoms as long they remain also freedoms. And of course, what do you say about the conversation among journalists about these initiatives from the European Union? Is there a unisono applause, or are there very controversial ideas about what is too much or what is too less?
You mean about the regulation of platforms?
Yes, for instance, that's a good example, yes.
I think it is very... Oh, je me suis mis à parler en anglais. Oui, ce qui me semble important, c'est que jusqu'à présent, et encore avant l'Internet, le débat public, le débat démocratique public, qui est essentiel pour qu'on se comprenne les uns et les autres, pour qu'on échange, était quand même soumis à certaines règles. Aujourd'hui, ce qu'on voit, c'est que sur les plateformes, sur Internet, il n'y a plus aucune règle, il n'y a plus aucune garantie démocratique. Donc nous, ce que nous plaidons pour que les plateformes n'aient pas le pouvoir de tout faire, de tout décider, et pour qu'on restaure des garanties démocratiques dans ce débat public, dans cet espace de la communication qui est maintenant a lieu principalement sur les réseaux sociaux, sur Internet. Il ne s'agit pas de sanctionner, nous voulons le faire en respectant la liberté, les standards internationaux de la liberté. Il ne s'agit pas de supprimer, et en tous les cas de donner ce pouvoir aux plateformes, de nous dire que ce qu'on a le droit de lire, que ce qu'on n'a pas le droit de lire, qu'est-ce qui est vrai, qu'est-ce qui est faux. C'est un pouvoir exorbitant qu'on laisse aux plateformes. Donc il faut remettre des règles qui soient respectueuses de la liberté, mais il est important que, effectivement, les gens puissent... ne soient pas laissés dans ce chaos informationnel où voilà, les opinions, les mensonges, la désinformation règnent et où il est très difficile de s'y repérer. Donc voilà, pour nous, le meilleur moyen de faire ça, c'est d'obliger les plateformes à promouvoir les sources, je dis bien les sources, d'informations fiables. C'est-à-dire qu'il ne s'agit pas de se prononcer sur le contenu, mais sur les sources journalistiques de confiance et de leur redonner dans les algorithmes une place qui les fait arriver en avant. Voilà.
I mean, this sourcing, I think, is a key issue, and Anthony, going from the European to the global level when it comes to these issues, in your organization, is this conversation very similar, or is Europe here like a front runner of having this conversation, or do you see like there are ways of handling these challenges from across the world which could inspire us in Europe?
Merci. Je vais aussi parler en français, pour la diversité, comme Julie, mais aussi pour les travailleurs qui sont derrière ici, c'est-à-dire les interprètes. Et ça me repose d'écouter ma langue. Bon, c'est une boutade, bien entendu, mais il est vrai que la situation mondiale est catastrophique. À peu près tous les mois, vous avez 6 journalistes qui se font assassiner dans le monde. Et je suis très heureux d'ailleurs de me retrouver une fois encore aux côtés de Matthew, qui a bien expliqué la situation dans laquelle il est aujourd'hui, le courage qui est le sien, la dignité qui est la sienne. Et des confrères et des consoeurs, en tout cas des confrères comme Matthew, j'en ai très régulièrement au téléphone. Des parents de confrères et de consoeurs qui ont été assassinés, des époux, des épouses, des enfants. Et au-delà des statistiques, parce que l'an dernier, on a comptabilisé 65 journalistes qui ont été assassinés dans le monde. Au-delà des statistiques, ce sont des personnes qu'il y a derrière. Ce sont des familles, comme je disais, et Matthew en est la preuve ici. Et il faut vraiment prendre ce sujet au sérieux, et très honnêtement, on est assez peu à en parler. Et une fois encore, je tiens à saluer le travail et l'organisation de cette réunion pour mettre en avant, pour mettre en lumière le travail de la Fédération internationale des journalistes que je dirige aujourd'hui, mais aussi des organisations non gouvernementales comme celle dans laquelle Julie travaille. Je parlais évidemment du monde, mais je vais aussi resserrer très vite au sein du Conseil de l'Europe. Julie a fait une très bonne présentation sur l'Union européenne et c'est parfaitement complet et je n'en ai rien à ajouter. Le monde, vous avez le Mexique qui est hyper dangereux, c'est le pays le plus dangereux aujourd'hui. Être journaliste aujourd'hui au Mexique, c'est quasiment impossible, en tout cas dans les zones où la corruption est aussi... qui organise aussi les meurtres de nos confrères et de nos consoeurs. Mais il ne faut jamais oublier l'Inde, le Pakistan, l'Afghanistan aujourd'hui, bien entendu. Et l'Afghanistan fait partie de l'essentiel du travail que je suis en train de faire avec mon équipe, parce que je ne suis pas seul, à Bruxelles, mais aussi dans nos bureaux en région, pour tenter d'exfiltrer tous nos confrères et tous nos consoeurs qui sont directement menacés. Et sans vous mentir, on reçoit pas loin d'une 50aine de messages, WhatsApp, Messenger, etc., des messages complètement désespérés, où on a même des gens qui nous disent « si vous ne nous aidez pas, on va se suicider ». C'est ça la réalité aujourd'hui du journalisme. Alors certes, l'Afghanistan a fait la une de tous les médias pendant plusieurs semaines, et c'est très bien. Mais aujourd'hui, on ne parle plus que du Covid, d'un potentiel, en Europe, hein, d'un potentiel reconfinement, d'un potentiel port de masque dans les écoles. Et l'Afghanistan est passé vraiment dans un arrière-plan. Alors si je resserre un petit peu au niveau du Conseil de l'Europe, la Fédération internationale des journalistes, mais aussi notre groupe européen, la Fédération européenne, et puis des ONG, Reporters sans frontières en fait partie, on a créé, grâce au Conseil de l'Europe, et ça je voudrais vraiment insister et remercier une fois encore cette initiative politique pour mettre en place un réel outil de travail et d'observation, de constat sur ce qui se passe dans le Conseil de l'Europe, c'est-à-dire sur les 47 pays du Conseil de l'Europe. Russie, Azerbaïdjan, Turquie, qui sont compris. Et Julie mentionnait les assassinats dans la partie de l'Union européenne, mais sur cette partie de Conseil de l'Europe, on a listé depuis 2015 33 morts. 33 morts, c'est énorme. Alors, l'Europe est censée être quand même la région du monde où on est le plus en sécurité, où le journaliste est le plus en sécurité. Et il se trouve que quand on l'élargit, 33 morts, c'est beaucoup trop. Alors bien entendu, il y a les 8 morts de Charlie Hebdo en 2015. Nous y étions tous. Et c'était des amis. Moi, je travaille toujours pour de la presse française. Quelques-uns d'entre eux m'étaient très proches. Mais il n'y a pas que. Il y a des Russes, il y a des Azéris, il y a des Maltais, bien entendu. Une Maltaise, une Polonaise, une Ukrainienne, un Danois, une Serbe. 33 morts dans la zone du Conseil de l'Europe, c'est évidemment beaucoup trop. Et lorsqu'on interroge les pays, les gouvernements des pays où ça s'est passé, lorsque le Conseil de l'Europe, la secrétaire générale actuelle, interroge les gouvernements, dans la majorité des cas, il n'y a pas de réponse du gouvernement. Et quand il y a des réponses, elles sont souvent farfelues. Et la Fédération de Russie ne répond jamais. La Turquie ne répond jamais. La Serbie répond une fois sur deux. L'Ukraine répond, mais avec des réponses qui sont complètement insatisfaisantes sur l'état de l'enquête, sur est-ce que vous avez mis en place un système de protection des journalistes, est-ce que où vous en êtes dans la lutte contre l'impunité dans votre pays. Parce que je rappelle que l'impunité, c'est la grande graine essentielle qui est en train de grignoter notre profession. L'impunité protège les assassins de journalistes. Et lorsqu'un assassin de journaliste n'est pas poursuivi, c'est déjà pour la famille un signal extrêmement désastreux, parce que la famille sait très bien qu'ils ne connaîtront jamais la vérité. Et ça donne surtout un signal aux autres confrères et consoeurs dans les rédactions qui leur dit « si vous continuez, voilà ce qui va vous arriver ». C'est ce qui s'est passé pendant des années à Malte, notamment après l'assassinat de Daphné. 33 morts dans la zone du Conseil de l'Europe. Et dans la zone du Conseil de l'Europe, c'est la plus grande prison du monde pour les journalistes également. On recense actuellement, j'ai revérifié les statistiques ce matin, 113 journalistes en prison, dans la grande zone européenne du Conseil de l'Europe. Et l'essentiel, évidemment, des journalistes sont en Turquie. Ceux qui sont en prison sont en Turquie, qui est une des plus grandes prisons du monde. Il y en a un en Russie, 5 en Ukraine, 11 en Azerbaïdjan et 1 au Royaume-Uni. Un au Royaume-Uni, c'est Julian Assange, comme vous le savez, bien entendu, membre de la Fédération internationale via notre syndicat australien. Et depuis 2015, la Fédération internationale et les autres organisations, membres de ce consortium pour le Conseil de l'Europe, on a émis 1069 alertes. Alors des alertes qui peuvent aller évidemment du meurtre ou de l'emprisonnement, mais des atteintes à la sécurité, à l'intégrité physique des journalistes, des effets dissuasifs sur la liberté des médias, comme le fait de révéler ses sources, les pressions financières, on parlait tout à l'heure des procédures bâillons, harcèlement et intimidation des journalistes, notamment des femmes. On insiste également avec nos syndicats, les femmes sont souvent en première ligne sur ces questions-là, et détention bien entendu et emprisonnement des journalistes. Donc 1069 alertes envoyées depuis Strasbourg du Conseil de l'Europe au gouvernement des 47 pays. Il y a eu 546 réponses, c'est-à-dire la moitié. C'est-à-dire que la moitié sont restées sans réponse aujourd'hui. Et sur ces 1069 alertes, on a eu 168 affaires qui ont été résolues, c'est-à-dire des cas qui ont été résolus, type les assassinats de Charlie Hebdo, qui sont des cas résolus pour la justice. Et ça représente seulement 15%. C'est-à-dire qu'à un moment donné, on est vraiment dans un scandale. On est soit dans l'Union européenne, soit au niveau du Conseil de l'Europe. Et lorsqu'un cas est avéré, il doit avoir une réponse d'une démocratie qui est dite membre du Conseil de l'Europe. Ils ont des devoirs en tant qu'États membres. Les parlementaires de ces États, au niveau du Parlement européen, ont des devoirs vis-à-vis de leurs citoyens. Et je rappelle qu'un des premiers droits du citoyen, c'est d'être bien informé. Et là, on est complètement en dehors des clous. Et il y a un moment donné, on peut parler de la précarité qui touche les rédactions, on peut parler des fake news, qui sont aussi le résultat, bien entendu, des plateformes. Mais il y a un moment donné, il y a une responsabilité politique qui doit être assumée par les politiques. C'est comme mon histoire avec l'Afghanistan. J'ai 7000 personnes qui attendent, on en exfiltre tous les jours, mais 7000 personnes qui attendent de la Fédération internationale qu'elle puisse trouver une solution pour leur cas. Sauf que moi, je ne suis une sorte d'urgentiste de la profession, je n'ai pas d'avion à ma disposition. Je n'ai pas des centaines de personnes comme un ministère d'un grand pays pour faire sortir ces pays-là. Je ne peux pas émettre de visa humanitaire. C'est la même chose pour le Conseil de l'Europe. En tant qu'organisation internationale, on n'a pas les moyens, on a les moyens d'alerter, de faire notre job, de défendre la liberté d'expression, de défendre les droits syndicaux, ce qui est mon job principal en tant qu'ESG, notamment au sein de l'Organisation internationale du travail à Genève. Mais on ne peut pas aller plus loin, on ne va pas aller taper à la porte du gouvernement maltais ou à la porte de Poutine pour lui dire maintenant, il faut lancer des enquêtes, il y a eu des morts sur votre terrain. Donc la responsabilité, elle doit être politique. Et il y a un moment donné, des sanctions doivent être contraignantes, ça c'est une évidence. Il y a des grandes paroles qui sont dites par la présidente de la Commission européenne ou le président du Parlement européen, que j'ai encore entendu récemment. Mais la solution, à notre avis, au niveau européen, c'est de taper au porte-monnaie. Il n'y a que ça qui marche. Lorsqu'un État est condamné par la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme, ils ont des amendes. Et lorsqu'ils ont une amende, ils la paient. Ils sont bien obligés de la payer. Et c'est aussi une humiliation. Mon propre pays, la France, a eu 1 million d'euros il n'y a pas longtemps à payer. C'est une humiliation pour un pays où, soi-disant, la Déclaration des droits de l'homme a été signée. Quand on est condamné pour atteinte aux droits de l'homme, on a une amende à payer. Et ça, la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme le fait. Il faut faire la même chose au niveau du journalisme, de la liberté d'expression et de la liberté de la presse. Au niveau européen, au niveau international, on a proposé pour que l'impunité cesse une bonne fois pour toutes, avec nos syndicats mondiaux, avec nos 190 syndicats mondiaux. On est en train de travailler avec les différentes diplomaties influentes, au sein du Conseil de sécurité notamment, mais pas que, ou au sein du Conseil de sécurité élargi à New York et ailleurs, pour qu'une convention pour la protection et la sécurité des journalistes soit adoptée par l'Assemblée générale et évidemment par le Conseil de sécurité, pour que ce soit définitivement organisé pour que les journalistes puissent travailler correctement au Mexique, en Inde, au Pakistan, en Afghanistan, mais aux Philippines aussi. Maria Ressa, la récente prix Nobel de la paix des Philippines, pourrait vous en parler. Et la dernière chose, on parlait de Pegasus, et je terminerai là-dessus. Pegasus, c'est une des pires nouvelles qui est arrivée de l'année, en plein été. Aujourd'hui, on n'est plus en sécurité physique quand on travaille dans une zone dite en paix, soit en Europe ou dans le reste du monde, mais maintenant, on peut se faire harceler, pister, juste via son téléphone portable. Le pire, c'est que vous ne le savez même pas. Et je suis en train de travailler avec la haut-commissaire aux droits de l'homme des Nations Unies, Michelle Bachelet, l'ancienne présidente de la République du Chili. J'ai un groupe de travail avec elle et une partie des gouvernements du Haut-Commissariat des droits de l'homme pour essayer de trouver des solutions à ce problème qui est mondial. Parce que là, on n'est même pas dans des histoires de frontières, d'Europe, etc. Tout le monde est touché. Journalistes, politiques, responsables syndicaux, tout le monde potentiellement est touché. Et non seulement ces journalistes-là sont menacés, non seulement ces journalistes-là ou ces responsables syndicaux ont de vraies atteintes à leur liberté individuelle, des vraies atteintes aux droits de l'homme, mais on sait déjà que ce système-là a provoqué au moins une personne, la mort d'une personne. Et le pire, si je puis dire, dans cette histoire, c'est que le gouvernement marocain, récemment, a déposé plainte, a non seulement écouté des journalistes français, de l'Humanité, que je connais bien, du Monde, de Radio France, et il a en plus déposé plainte récemment. Et la Fédération internationale est aux côtés de nos syndicats, pour défendre évidemment ces journalistes. Et on est en train d'essayer de trouver une solution, et je peux vous assurer que c'est vraiment compliqué, pour empêcher des entreprises comme NSO en Israël, mais il y en a évidemment d'autres, d'espionner les journalistes et d'atteindre tout simplement leur dignité et leurs droits, les droits de l'homme de base. Donc le défi est énorme, que ce soit au sein de l'Union, au sein du Conseil d'Europe ou dans le monde. Malgré cela, en tant que secrétaire général, j'essaie de rester optimiste, j'essaie de rester debout, comme je leur dis souvent. J'étais récemment dans le Golfe Persique. Je reste debout parce que vous faites tout pour rester debout. Ils n'ont rien, une liberté souvent égale, pas loin de zéro, et pourtant ils se battent, et pourtant ils sont résistants. Et rien que pour ça, en tant que fédération mondiale, je me dois de rester positif, même si le constat est catastrophique. Et on a besoin du soutien d'organisations comme la vôtre, et merci encore une fois d'organiser ce débat ce matin avec mes confrères et consoeurs ici. Mais n'oubliez jamais que la liberté de la presse, elle s'acquiert jour, et elle se défend jour après jour. Et je peux vous assurer que c'est hyper compliqué, surtout quand vous avez un mort qui est à plus d'une heure d'avion de Bruxelles ou de Paris. Dès qu'on est à plus d'une heure d'avion de Bruxelles ou de Paris, on n'intéresse plus personne, malheureusement. Et c'est le pire qui puisse arriver pour les familles de nos victimes, c'est l'oubli. Non seulement il n'y a pas d'enquête, mais c'est aussi l'oubli. Merci.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for this very powerful and very clear speech and also sharing, I mean, offering a mirror to the reality which is really not nice, which is far from the nice declarations, from the ambitions. And what touched me also in your sharing is that, in fact, I mean, you're talking also about people being active in different forms, journalists, of course, but also people in trade unions, people working in education. I mean, in fact, it's about active citizenship, and active citizenship becoming a threat to these people who are active, and the institutions are not able to protect active citizenship, which is the core of democratic development. And I think this tension between having the nice idea and institutions for democracy, and at the same time not being able to protect and safeguard the lives of those who are in fact realizing it by their activity, that's the big challenge, and the big the work also we have ahead of us. And also what you said, I mean, you remain optimist in a way. It's, of course, I mean, democracy without some optimism is not possible, because otherwise we simply give up. And as a journalist, we are basically not giving up through the idea of that this everyday work is so essential to it. So thank you so much. And I think this is now really giving the context and the broad picture also when we are now looking into concrete let's say, stories and examples of journalists from around Europe who meet these challenges, who experience these problems every day. For this, we have invited 3 journalists from Central Europe: Zuzana Hanzelova from Slovakia, Andrzej Stankiewicz from Poland, and Martin Karpati from Hungary. Welcome very much also, and I want to briefly introduce you. You, Susanna, you in a few years ago left together with other reporters RTAS, the Slovak public broadcaster. You were working for in protest against the management, which they said was trying to favor Russian propaganda, and the governing party in the news. And now you work as a video reporter for Demnik SME. And Andrzej has twice taken the cases to the European Court of Human Rights to overturn convictions in the Polish courts for your journalistic publications, and you have won.
Twins. I mean,
how much?
Twins, yeah. It sounds sometimes terrible and politically, especially because it's called Stankiewicz versus Poland, 2-0.
Okay, yes. And you're also a 3-time winner of the Grand Press Award, the most important journalism prize in Poland. And you have worked for Poland's largest media, including sorry.
It's very difficult. It's Polish for Republic. It's Rzeczpospolita.
Republic.
It's impossible to...
Sorry.
To say
Newsweek Polska and Post. And you're now the deputy editor in Onet, Poland's largest independent news website. And thirdly, Martin Karpati, you were among the editors and also employees who in 2020 you left Index HU, the Hungary's biggest news site, following a dispute with the new owners over the sacking of the site's lead editor. And now, as the former deputy editor, you have been co-founding together with colleagues Telex, a new independent news portal, and you are the CEO of this new news portal in Hungary. So let me start with Ms. Hanselova first. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience of government interference in your work as a journalist in Slovakia?
Yes, sure. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me? Okay, now. I have great respect for my colleagues from Poland and Hungary because my situation is I mean, I cannot compare myself to them. So good luck, guys. I hope that it will get better soon and we watch it closely because what happened to us and to the public TV in Slovakia, it's a symptom of Central Europe somehow. So I used to work for RTVS, as you mentioned before, which is radio and TV that is public in Slovakia. And I worked there for approximately 6 years with a general director that was appointed by the parliament because that's the system in Slovakia. And he was somehow mistaken the system, and we somehow built trust and credible news during the years, and of course independence, which is never, welcomed by the politicians usually. After 5 years, the term of the general director ends, and the parliament appointed a new one who very fastly started to favor one governing party, and he had many suggestions about the Russian propaganda or some crazy stories. After the death of Jan Kuciak and his fiancée Martina Kushnirova, he was asking seriously if the protests that were sparked in the country were organized by George Soros and some really absurd questions. So we slowly realized that this will not be probably a successful story. He changed all the management, and we were basically in a permanent conflict with our editors and managers for several months. It was a lot of bossing and bullying of myself and my colleagues. I was news anchor and chief political correspondent in the TV section, and they started to send me to premieres of theater and operas instead of sending me to the parliament and stuff like that. So it was pretty intense, and but we were a good team, a united team, and we managed to for several months to still do our jobs. But after a few months, the general director fired 4 of my colleagues and brought in 4 new ones that were willing to broadcast whatever he wanted. So we slowly realized that we have to leave and that it's not possible for us to do our jobs anymore in the company. And probably 15 of us or something around that number left the company with a critical statement and a critical video that we released on the day of the announcement. And since then, 40 people already left the company, 40 journalists. And we do have a new government now for a year and a half. And somehow we thought that maybe the approach of the new politicians would change, which is not the case. And it seems that the general director will be probably next year appointed by the parliament again, which is a sad story. I do have some lessons that we can learn from this situation. First one is that we cannot be naive, and if the government changes, it doesn't mean that the situation will change. The other one is if you work for a public broadcaster in countries like Slovakia or Visegrad 4 countries, you have to be prepared to fight a battle, and it's good to be prepared legally, but also with your social media, and we were pretty well prepared. We had lawyers on our side from the country that were helping us a lot. We, for our protection, formed unions because, in Slovakia there is a law that if you are in union, you cannot be fired. So they were not able to fire me in any case. So that was the legal battle we fought. And the other lesson is that we were hugely supported by other journalists in the country. from privately owned media, and it really did help the situation because we were not alone. I guess this will be different in other stories, and that's why we should protect not only public media but privately owned media as well, because they, in case the battle as our battle was lost for the public TV, they are still important in the country. So that's pretty much my story.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, let's turn to Poland then, which you, Susanna, said is maybe in a more difficult situation. Is that the case, Andrzej?
Let me first pay tribute to all the journalists who lost their lives. And for us, for me, the stories of late Daphne Galizia was quite moving, and the story of actuality journalist Jan Kuciak also, because it was shocking for me that some things can happen so closely inside the European Union. And what's more, Jan Kuciak was working for the same company I work for, because, which is very crucial for my speech, I work for onet.pl. This is the biggest independent news site, but it's a part of the huge media company. It's joint venture by Swiss Ringier and the German Axel Springer, the same with Actuality Jan Kuciak worked for. So let me be precise. I mean, our danger, I mean, our in Poland, are from the different world. Luckily, they are quite tough. They are very visible and very important, but from the different world. And that's why I wanted to stress it. To understand what's going on in Poland, I have to give you quite a short brief to understand what's going on. It's a little bit the same mechanism like in Slovakia and Hungary, because, you know, this crisis, democratic crisis, spreads faster than COVID, I believe. And Poland has been ruled since 2015 by Conservative Law and Justice Party. You can know it as an acronym PiS because it's Polish for Law and Justice. And its leader, Jarosław Kaczyński, I followed the guy for 30 years because I follow politics. I'm chief political correspondent nowadays, and I know him for years. And I know that he had, for years, a very vivid vision of remodeling, rebuilding the country. And from 2015, point after point, he's making his new revolution. I mean, the revolution is based on one basic rule: to extend the power. I mean, nowadays the ruling party controls everything. You know, from the very, you know, local institution to the highest ranked courts, constitutional tribunal. Very important is controlling the state-owned company, because they are politically important. I will explain you why. But in fact, the most important structures nowadays in Poland is not the legal structures of the country, but the party structure. And to some degree, structure of the party and the character of the party and construction of the party replaces the institution of the state. More important is your rank in the party and the way the party deals with some problems than the ways that you are officially in the rank of administration or how the state deals with the problem. This is how it works. This is the main problem. In Poland, there are 3 televisions. One is state-owned. I believe, the same situation like Slovakia, but much more brutal, because after the election, I mean, Kaczynski, every time, I mean, during these 30 years, I talked to him many times. I don't want to use the word obsessed, but he's convinced that he have to control the media, either by pressing toward them or fighting to have control over them, or fighting with them. If it's impossible to make, any press on them, he's fighting with media. That's why one of the first decisions he made after winning the election was, taking control over the state-owned media. And the most important player is Polish TV, national TV called TVP. And he changed it into brutal propaganda. You can't imagine what he's doing. I mean, the standard communicate on every level, on every issue about the opposition, about the sometimes even coalition parties, but also about independent media is betrayers. They are fighting with Polish national interest. They are lying, and as you know, all the information TVs, they have these information bars down. You wouldn't believe what they are willing to write there about the independent media, about the opposition. It's completely crazy. It's the way of brutal propaganda. The chief is one of the most important men of propaganda, former member of European Parliament, Jacek Kurski. He can do anything, believe me. I know the guy. And this propaganda makes a very important role during the elections. That's why from 2015 they win election after election. Because in Poland is, to some degree, still rural country. And in rural areas, this public owned TV is the main source of information. And people, I believe this is the problem of 30 years of democracy in Poland, that and nowadays it's also, I believe, quite universal in the world, not only in Europe, not only in the European Union. We were not able to learn people how to deal with the information, how to deal with media, how to deal with propaganda. They have no instrument to understand what's going on. And TVP is changing people's mind. Believe me, they do that. And it has real political impact, and it influences people because they play with hatred towards political opponents and towards independent media. I will show you how they do that. The second television is owned by the very rich Polish businessman, but on the other hand, he has many different businesses in the branches which are regulated by the state, like telecommunication, banking, energy, blah, blah, blah. So you can imagine that that the ruling party has many ways to press on him, and you can see it in his media. Third station is TVN. This is a station critical to the government. It's owned by the US giant Discovery, which is very important because a few months ago, the government decided to hit the TVN as the main, opposition station and the only one making investigative journalism in Poland nowadays, independent investigative journalism. They prepared a legal action trying to redefine Polish media law, making it impossible for non-European economic area countries, European Union and Liechtenstein, I believe, Norway and Iceland. Okay, they made a law that if you are outside from European area, economic area country, you can't control media in Poland. And the leader, Jarosław Kaczyński, claimed, he took the floor and explained to the, to the electorate, to the people, why is that? And he said, we are on a hybrid war. It was a few months ago. It wasn't the crisis of Belarus nowadays. I will tell you something more about this crisis, but it was a few months ago. He said, we are on a hybrid war, And according to Kaczynski, Poland is treated by a hybrid war in which suspicious companies controlled by Russian, Chinese, or Arabs can buy media in Poland. And he said also that it's possible that in Poland, the media in Poland will be bought by drug cartels from South Africa. But the real fact is that the only company from outside European Economic Area, it was controlled by the American TVN. That's why they made this action. It failed because of the inner conflict inside the ruling camp, only because, I mean, they were, of course, American authorities made action to protect TVN, they just don't care. I mean, Polish law and justice, when the leader is decided, they do whatever he wants. Print media. There are still independent media in Poland, in print especially. For instance, Gazeta Wyborcza, and the largest Polish daily critical to the government, also dealing with investigative journalism, high-quality journalism. But for instance, the government cut off the cost of the advertisement, of public advertisement. I will tell you, this is not, I mean, this is the case of state-owned Polish companies, because the electricity, oil companies, all they are controlled by the state, and they cut off the advertisement. They don't use, you know, market criteria, just political criteria, giving the advertisement. Funny story is, last year when they promoted COVID campaign, vaccination campaign, they asked us, independent media, to promote it for free, and we do that. At the same time, they paid for their own, I mean, party-controlled company. Even TVP received, public TV received money for that, and we made it for free. This is how it works. So they made a transaction. This is a little bit Hungarian model. I will make such. I have such impression, because the biggest Polish state-controlled company, fuel company, bought 20 regional newspapers. Poland has 16 regions, but altogether we have 22 or 3 regional titles, and they bought almost all of them. Okay, you can say paper is declining. It has no role. It has a very important role, because, I mean, they bought these 20 titles with the internet size. And all of these, I mean, all these titles have 70 million people in 38 million Poland of reach, which means that in the Polish internet, the internet sites controlled by the state company, oil company, is the biggest news provider. We, I mean, on it, we are biggest independent news provider, but they, the biggest one, real biggest one, they are. Of course, after the transaction, they are declining, because nobody, I mean, not everybody buying the propaganda, but still you have to understand, they have, you know, they use public money, public company money to buy the media. And they make, I mean, they have other ideas of buying media. They were also trying to buy us, using, because structure of Axel Springer is that it has an American owner also, so they were searching for the chance to buy on it. They were searching, I mean, they were trying to buy TVN also, so they are pressing or buying or cutting costs. This is the way. And if failed something about this operation, they are attacking journalists. Leading politicians of the ruling party just don't give interviews to independent media. They don't answer the questions during the press conferences. They don't answer questions we send officially to the institution. Just don't. No consequences. And we are very, very often under fierce attack. It's not about criticizing our work. I have to say that, because it's obvious that politicians don't like journalists, and we don't want to be laughed. This is not the way it should work. But we are fiercely attacked. because of the truth we are publishing. I have many stories, but they are all detailed local politics, but believe me, I have myself many cases. I wrote the truth, had the documents, I was fiercely attacked as a, fake news media or something like that. Border. As you know, there is ongoing migration crisis between Poland and Belarus, and the government has introduced a state of emergency in part of Poland, giving us no chance to make reports. Polish journalists are very good. We were covering all the conflicts, international conflicts during 30 years. We had people in Iraq, Afghanistan. I myself was in Georgia in 2008. And during the Russian intervention. And we can deal with that. We are not afraid of being, close to the border during migration crisis. And believe me, this was like, I don't know, maybe 20,000 people maximum. So it's not a big problem. In fact, I mean, there are tragedies, and we want to have the right to show it to people, and we were not obliged to do so. It was, closed border, and of course, this I call it no report zone for journalists. We are obliged to give people information, so we entered these zones, risking the accusations, and some of my colleagues from ONET received accusation just because of the entering to the zone. The government has a clear message that immigrants are violent young men suspected of involvement in terrorist organization and often with sexual disorders. And if journalists were allowed into this border area, I believe there's a political risk for the government that the other images will be published, like, child's, families, and things like that. They are afraid of that politically, but the explanation still, let me quote the main leader. I like to reinterpret his quotes. He has stated, explaining why we can't make, any reports about the border situation. He stated that some of the media in Poland, and also the European media or Western media, have taken side of Lukashenko and are accepting his story that he is in fact helping poor people. This is not true. We all realize how this operation was made, and we are not allies of Lukashenko. But using this argument towards public opinion make us as a betrayers of the national interest. This is the game. And I've just received, but you have to remember, this is very important because we are discussing on the European Union. During this crisis, and before even, the common thing in the way that people from Law and Justice, members of Law and Justice, and Kaczynski himself, how they explain people Polish situation, is that we have the crisis on the eastern side. We have a conflict with Lukashenko and Putin, but this is direct quote from Kaczynski. You can see it on the movie. You can see it on the news. There is a conflict on the eastern flank, but on the other hand, you can't see the other conflict. We have the conflict with the European Union. So he's building symmetry. That we have two conflicts at the same time. And this is rhetoric he uses talking about situation in Poland to his electorate. And in this rhetoric, we as an independent journalist, of course, we are enemies. And I will show you the example. Just a few minutes ago, I received from one of my colleagues the article on TVP, this information channel website. This is pure propaganda, very brutal one. And the article is called 30 reasons why Onet, my company, TVN, this TV controlled by American Discovery, and Gazeta Wyborcza, this independent one I told you about, is making investigative journalism. So 30 reasons why Onet, TVN, and Gazeta Wyborcza should be now not allowed to be on the border of Poland. And they wrote a story, big story about that, naming us not journalists, but workers, media workers. And I started with information that I work in a joint venture company of Swiss company and German one. Very common is, and this is in this text used, that we, I mean, my company, my journalist, me, myself, we are called Polish language media. This is not very easy to explain you what does it mean, but I will try that. During the Second World War, under the German occupation, there were Polish media, I mean Polish language media. I mean, they were published in Polish, but they, of course, didn't represent Polish interests. They were made by collaborators. And nowadays, we are called Polish language media. So, final words. I don't have recipes what we can do, but I believe that democracy is the gentleman's agreement, and we have no answer what to do if somebody is winning election democratically, but is not a gentleman to accept the reasons, the rules of democracy. And I believe that giving protection to the journalists is crucial one, and education to people, how to understand media, and we discussed the role of social media, role of, you know, crazy algorithms which promote hatred. I mean, this is also very, very important. So protecting journalism, some regulation in social media, and teaching people how to deal with the propaganda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this sharing. When I first was asked to moderate this and I saw it's a debate, it's an event of more than 2.5 hours, I asked, is it really so long? And now I start to understand that we should have much more time. And Hungary, please.
More or less, okay. I'm Marton Kárpáti. I come from Budapest, Hungary, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for being interested in what is going on the other side of the continent. Well, as many of the people before me said, that we have lots of common with Poland. I should tell almost the exact same stories about the situation in Hungary, where the media is really in a bad shape. There's an index, the World Press Freedom Index, made by Reporters Without Borders, and now we are on the 92 place, 92nd, and 15 years ago we were the 10th. So it's a deep dive, yeah, and we have lots of problems. Fortunately, we are not being killed yet, but we do get threats. Our main problem is accessing information. I used to work at Index, which was Hungary's biggest news site and most influential news site, with 1.5 million readers daily. And some government-linked businessmen got into the board and started making advices and visions how the editorial should work. And at one point, they just fired our editor-in-chief, and all the staff quit, which was 90 people. 1 month later, we started Telex, a completely new news site of our own. We asked for people to donate money for that, to start to help it, and it was a surprisingly big success. They gave like 1 million euros in a few weeks, so we had a safe start. And most of our colleagues, we are like 70 of us now. We all come from Index, so we made an independent big news site. We are on our own. We have no bosses. We are the bosses of our own. We make our decisions, and it's a comfortable thing. I'm not sure how many news outlets can say that about themselves, but it's a good story in that way. So back to the problems in Hungary. We have the biggest problem in accessing information. As in Poland, we don't get answers from officials, governments, people. We don't get invitation to press conferences where public matters are being discussed or just said. And this makes our work pretty hard. Let me tell you just a few examples how things work in Hungary, and you will probably get a more clear vision. And there are, I guess, these are things that probably are you cannot imagine how things works because in your country, most of you don't have to deal with such things. So we have a ruling party in power for 12 years now. They have the supermajority in the parliament, so they have the 2/3 of the votes, so they can do whatever they want. The leader of this government has not given an interview to any independent or critical news outlet for more than 13 years. And once when we could ask him why is that, he just said that I don't want to talk about unpleasant questions. And this is what the chief says, and all his deputies, the ministers, the deputies of the ministers, the secretaries, they all follow this. So mainly we have one chance to ask questions from government's people is when we chase them on the street with microphones and cameras, but they don't get answer. But we have the chance to ask the questions. And when I talk about my friends, when I talk to my friends about this situation, they always ask, okay, well, there's anything you can do? I mean, there are laws, there's the media authority, which should just just look upon the things going on the media sphere. But this authority is filled up only with government's people. I mean, so there's not a single chance to investigate or to look up on any shady things going in the media business, because they are all government's people there and they won't examine their own issues. So we have the same propaganda system as in Poland. We have the public service media, which gets 300 million euros a year, every year, and it publishes only government propaganda. no oppositional opinions are published, no oppositional politicians are invited. They only show what the government says, and yeah, like in Poland, independent journalists, independent NGOs are being bullied or attacked in these media outlets, and it's an absurd situation. We have that's a typical Hungarian thing, I guess. We have foundation, a state-funded foundation, media foundation, which has more than almost 500 media outlets in it. So it's a huge conglomeration with media outlets who only publish the government's opinions and news. And we have the same situation with the countryside media. We have 19 counties. All the counties have one major daily printed newspaper with the website as well. They are all controlled by the government now. The government is the biggest spender on the advertisement market, which is like insane. And most of the money they spend in the media goes to the friendly places, mostly. So it's more than 90% is going to the media, which says what the government wants to hear and wants to publish so we have a tough situation, but despite all the circumstances, I'm still optimistic because yeah, we have an independent news site. We can write whatever we want. Some of my friends ask, okay, but what if you get older? What if you die out and you just go to pension and you don't do the work? What's going to happen? I mean, where are the young people? And we started an internship program for like 8 places, and there were more than 500 candidates. They were young people coming. The first question I would ask them, why are you here? What do you want in your life? Oh, come on. Haven't you read the news that what's going on in this country? But that's a good sign. So I'm pretty optimistic. The main thing is how you define press freedom, because the government's people in Hungary always say, okay, there's free press in Hungary. You can ask questions, okay, if you chase them on the street, or you can write anything you want. But press freedom is not just you can write whatever you want. It's a more complex thing. You have to deal with all the signs we were talking about. You have to think about journalists being killed. You have to think about journalists being bullied for doing their jobs, and so it's a more complex thing, and I don't know how to get that, how to make a conclusion, but you have to define what freedom of press means first, and then you can make laws, you can make sanctions, you can make further steps to the countries to get up to these definitions, or I don't know, but that's how I think. But yeah, I'm optimistic that this is our job, this is what we have to do, and we do the best we can. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this sharing again. I mean, it's really about what you are addressing are really situations which are not very, in any way, comforting to the idea of press freedom and democracy. And at the same time, you are exactly also showing that there are people like you who are working on that, who are active, who use the space, but this is not enough. And the question is, of course, how can that be supported? I'm a journalist covering these issues. I would have now hundreds of questions to you, but we have now talked for 2 hours. So please, the floor is open, and please use this opportunity to also, maybe if you want to know something more specifically on what has been said, because this source of gathered knowledge about these issues across Europe and the world is quite unique. I want also to thank the organizers very much for this panel. I'm deeply impressed, fascinated. Who wants? Yeah. The microphone should come. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, you first. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, lady first. We say lady first. Lady first.
Sorry. I can put it down, you mean? Just don't touch. Sorry,
Don't touch the microphones.
Okay. Because of the masks, I don't hear what she's saying.
Yeah.
I can take off my mask.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I come from Poland, so I just, I have one question, one comment. One question is to Anthony, because IFJ is really the largest journalist organization in the world. But you have contacts with the journalists in our countries, in Hungary, in Poland, etc. Do you think it would be possible to play on the other way around, not to give to speak these governments of such countries who play with journalists? They let them live, they don't kill them, but they don't let them work normally. Not to give them access to the media abroad, to have a ban for them when they want to speak. Like our Prime Minister gave an interview to Financial Times, which was a very controversial one as well. They want to be heard. They want to be exposed to all the credible media to distribute their own story. But they don't do this in their own countries. Do you think it would work and it could be done among, the community of journalists? That's my question. And the comment to what Andrzej was saying about the Polish situation, I would just add one more thing. I'm a political scientist, so I would just add, I don't know if you agree with me, but it's also the media sometimes is used for a political play, like the TVN story about the American television, who is owning the Discovery, who is owning the Polish provider, was also used in a way to make the Americans talk to this government. Because Joe Biden, the Democratic president, was very different than Donald Trump. And the administration of current Polish administration had very good relations with Donald Trump. But when the change happened in the US, it of course happened that the current government in Poland started to have problems with the Americans. So this was maybe one of the reasons that's how that was interpreted, to push the Americans to talk to this government, and which actually happened. So if you can comment on this political, aspects in the global scene, how the government can use the media in such political, for such political purposes. And do you agree with this interpretation? Thank you.
Thank you. These are big questions, but please try to be short in your answer. Yes. Yeah.
1 heure? Nous avons 1 heure? Non, c'est une excellente question, évidemment. Et c'est toute la question du politique et des médias, et on le voit dans tous les pays. Il n'y a pas qu'en Pologne ou aux États-Unis. Si on prend l'exemple des États-Unis, un cas concret, lorsque Donald Trump a commencé à attaquer les journalistes, on a vu, nous, de notre côté, les adhésions à nos différents syndicats, on en a quelques-uns aux États-Unis, qui ont augmenté. on a vu que les ventes des journaux ont augmenté. C'est-à-dire qu'à un moment donné, il y a aussi des aspects positifs. Certes, Trump était le roi de Twitter dès qu'il se levait le matin. Il attaquait tous ceux qui pouvaient attaquer, les journalistes bien entendu, mais pas que. Et il y a eu un moment donné, ça s'est retourné. Une partie de l'opinion s'est aussi retournée en se disant on va quand même vérifier ce qui se dit. On va aller acheter le New York Times. Les ventes du New York Times ont augmenté, les ventes du Washington Post ont augmenté. Et par effet de mécanique, les ventes de nos syndicats, les membres de nos syndicats ont aussi augmenté. Alors c'est pas le cas partout. On parle des États-Unis, on parle de, a priori, quand même une démocratie. Dans les pays où la répression est un peu plus compliquée, la répression est beaucoup plus difficile. C'est le cas en Hongrie. On a une organisation en Hongrie, le HPU. En Pologne, on a 3 organisations. Là, être membre d'un syndicat comme le nôtre est potentiellement un risque. Quand on est journaliste, on prend potentiellement un risque. Mais quand on est en plus militant syndical dans une organisation qui est un petit peu active, on prend un deuxième risque. Et il est clair que là, dans ces 2 pays-là particulièrement, mais c'est aussi le cas en République tchèque, où là je parle que de l'Europe, je ne parle pas des autres pays, l'Union européenne en tout cas, être membre d'un de nos syndicats est un risque. Et il y en a beaucoup qui passent le pas en adhérant directement, enfin en demandant directement la carte de presse internationale de la Fédération internationale, ce qui leur donne une protection internationale. Alors il est clair que nous, quand il y a des difficultés dans des pays comme ceux-là, on essaie de multiplier les rendez-vous sur place, personnels. Ça marche bien en Russie, ça. Dès qu'il y a une pression trop importante sur notre syndicat russe, on fait une réunion là-bas, et ça se calme. C'est le cas en Palestine. Moi, je vais aller un peu plus loin, mais le cas en Palestine, dès qu'il y a une pression un peu trop grande, on fait une réunion là-bas. Ça ne veut pas dire que ça se passe bien, mais on fait des réunions. Donc, la force de frappe qui est la nôtre peut apporter des réponses. Alors, le lien avec les politiques, il est clair que je ne veux pas dire, et on avait tout à l'heure des interventions sur le fait que certains médias touchaient plus d'argent que d'autres via le gouvernement, parce que c'est des médias qui sont un peu plutôt favorables, en tout cas, qui ne vont pas être trop ennuyeux avec le gouvernement. Ça, c'est une véritable difficulté. Et il y a évidemment nos organisations syndicales nous font part de ce genre de distorsion au sein même des médias, des grands médias, notamment en Pologne. Et on communique là-dessus, bien entendu, mais il y a aussi des mesures de rétorsion vers ceux qui sont sur le terrain. Et c'est toujours le difficile équilibre que nous avons entre défendre et crier depuis Bruxelles ou de Sydney, depuis mon bureau en Asie, en Afrique. C'est facile de crier depuis Bruxelles. On a aussi nos collègues qui sont sur place, qui, eux, sont en première ligne. Et on est toujours entre les deux en se disant jusqu'où on doit aller, voilà, pour ne pas les mettre en danger eux-mêmes à leur tour. Donc parfois ça marche, et donc moi la réponse que je donnais, c'est la réponse, elle doit être politique. C'est-à-dire que moi je peux taper du poing sur la table sur ceux qui sont responsables, les responsables politiques, en leur disant assumez vos responsabilités maintenant, et que ce soit au niveau des États ou au niveau des gouvernements, au niveau du Conseil de l'Europe, des parlements européens ou du Conseil de l'Union. Donc à un moment donné, chacun a ses responsabilités, qui sont quand même très claires. Et c'est pour cette raison-là que tout à l'heure j'ai un peu tapé du poing sur la table sur qui doit faire quoi. Et à un moment donné, quand on est un média de service public, on a aussi des engagements. Ils ont une fédération, EBU, des médias qui fait aussi son boulot de son côté, du côté des employeurs. Et les deux, on essaie de venir prendre en tenaille, si je puis dire, ces médias qui ne font pas leur boulot, qui sont des médias voyous, mais dans des États voyous. Donc on a chacun notre niveau, mais une fois de plus, les nôtres sont quand même limités, même si on peut avoir une force de frappe qui peut être symbolique parfois. Une fois encore, c'est chacun son boulot et chacun ses responsabilités. On essaie, nous, d'assumer les nôtres en tant qu'organisation mondiale, aux politiques, aux partis, aux élus, d'assumer les leurs aussi.
The frappe journalistique, that's yes.
Je vais parler en français aussi alors. Et parce que ma question, c'est justement aux syndicats, aux organisations. Et c'est peut-être une drôle de question, mais en fait, on voit que les agences de presse, dans tout le monde, mais en Europe en particulier, sont en difficulté, sauf les agences de presse qui s'occupent de finances, parce que là, ils ont des autres moyens pour alimenter le travail, disons. Mais les agences de presse sont en difficulté à cause de la situation d'Internet, social media, etc. Ça devient de plus en plus difficile pour les agences de presse, le business model, en fait. Et on parle de la presse libre comme d'un bien public, public good. Et ma question est, est-ce qu'il ne serait pas le cas de penser au niveau européen à un soutien public pour les agences de presse, évidemment avec des conditions très importantes de liberté éditoriale, de charte éditoriale qui doit être respectée. Mais l'idée est vraiment d'avoir des ressources publiques qui sont obligatoirement, à partir d'une loi européenne, mises à la disposition des agences de presse qui sont l'épine dorsale de l'information, donc des agences de presse qui garantissent la véridicité des informations, les sources, et qu'il n'y a pas des fake news, en fait. C'est un peu ça, un peu pour concurrencier aussi les fake news qui viennent de l'Internet, des social media, etc. Donc l'idée d'avoir un bien public, les agences de presse, financées par l'argent public, selon un critère et une loi européenne avec des conditions claires d'indépendance. Et là, et je termine, et là on voit par exemple en Slovénie, c'est ce qui s'est passé avec l'agence de presse slovène. Maintenant, les choses semblent aller un peu mieux, grâce aussi à la pression de l'Europe. Mais je crois que c'est un exemple, en fait. Merci.
Thank you very much. This was in fact a question I would have put in the end to everybody of you about that. I would propose we take 2 more questions and then we really make a concluding round with them. Yes, please, in the back.
My name is Xenia Kounarlaki. I'm a journalist with Kathimerini, a Greek daily. One comment and one question. I think I would suggest that we shouldn't look for a hero in every gunned-down journalist, because I noticed that you mentioned some Greek colleagues of mine. I think, to be honest, I feel kind of weird because the people you mentioned, there's another guy also who was killed recently. They were implicated into shady business, like blackmailing, members of organized crime, intervening between police and the local mafia. So I think they are nothing like Daphne Galicia or investigative journalists. It's a complete other case. And I think it's better to appreciate little acts of heroism like what Susanna describes, like walking out of your job, refusing to cover opera and theater, and knowing that you won't have an income in the next month and you won't be able to pay your rent. I think these little acts of heroism are also very important, for our job. Then my question to my colleagues from the illiberal democracies, as we call them, do you think it could be like a generational thing, like the younger generation following, in your footsteps would change this whole mentality? Because I think all the politicians you mentioned, Orban, Kaczynski, and they have this. They were educated under communism, and they think this is a normal way of dealing with media. So maybe the next generation of politicians and journalists will react to that and change the picture. I'm trying to be a bit optimistic.
Yes, thank you very much. Was there a more question here? Yes, please.
Oui, bonjour, Michel Plumenet. On a parlé de la Pologne, de la Hongrie, de la Slovaquie, de Malte et tout. Moi, je voulais poser la question à nos journalistes, entre autres français. Il n'y a pas que dans l'Europe de l'Est ou au Sud où il peut y avoir des problèmes. On a un cas bien particulier d'un puissant industriel français, pour ne pas le nommer Vincent Bolloré, qui opère une pression extrêmement violente sur des médias, notamment comme Europe 1, dans un cadre politique très particulier qui est le cadre des prochaines élections présidentielles en France et qui est directement lié à quelqu'un dont vous avez certainement entendu parler, un certain monsieur Éric Zemmour, et où on est à la limite d'une ligne rouge. Et je voulais savoir un petit peu quel était le rapport d'idées par rapport à ce qu'on entend en Pologne, en Hongrie ou à Malte, voire en Slovénie. Merci.
Thank you very much. Now I think it's really time for you to maybe give your views on selected questions, but maybe also something which have been discussed. So Matthew, you have the word.
You surprised me. No, I mean, the only one that I think I can respond to is about the Greek journalists. I mean, this is something that I've heard before, you know, where even in the case of the journalist who was murdered in the Netherlands, about 2 weeks ago, I was speaking to a journalist there, and she told me, oh, you know, but he was involved in some other stuff and wearing different hats and kind of intervening between criminals and the police and so on. And I said, well, that doesn't really mean that we should pay less attention to it, because in Malta, before my mother's murder, we had a sort of similar situation where immediately in the 2 years leading up to the murder, there were 6 car bombings that went unsolved. And the attitude was kind of similar. People were saying, oh, you know, these are just people in organized crime killing each other. If we just let them kill each other, it's better, because then we just kind of get rid of them. But that's a terrible attitude. One, because every victim is the same. I mean, a murder is a murder from the point of law enforcement, and equal attention should be paid to every murder by police. But it's more that with each murder, organized criminal groups were gaining more experience on how to murder people and get away with it. We're sort of building a greater sense of impunity. So it's a dangerous situation, and one which we should not sort of grow accustomed to.
Absolutely.
Irrespective of the activity that the person was conducting.
Yeah. If I may continue, Matthew,
sure.
The case with Jan Kuciak, who was murdered in Slovakia, was the original plan of the murderers were to kill him and dispose of the body, and then spread fake news about him being involved in organized crime. That was the original plan. That went wrong because his fiancée was at home accidentally, and they killed both of them, and they were in a hurry and in shock and left the bodies there. But the original plan was to do these kind of stories about him, which were untrue. But to say something, you know, in the end, Slovakia, after the murder of Jan Kuciak, the alleged person who allegedly ordered the murder was a mafia businessman. And they seized his phone, and since then we discovered horrible stories about corruption in the government and in the state. And since then, 30 judges are currently being charged with corruption, along with several elite members of police, including 2 former chief of police. One of them committed suicide in the jail and died. A former general prosecutor and special prosecutor whose job was to persecute mafia, and he was part of the organized crime with mafia, and he was the first to be sentenced for 13 years now. If I should say something, because Matthew said that you could see the steps coming into the murder of his mother, and if you think about the situation in Slovakia, you could see the steps leading to murder of Jan Kuciak, because we let the corruption overtake the state step by step, and it always leads to something that is worse and worse, and sometimes it's the murder of a journalist, sometimes it's the murder of somebody else, maybe a politician in opposition, whatever. So maybe we should pay more attention to maybe smaller cases, but important cases, and not be ignorant to corruption and hold the politicians accountable. So,
thank you. Anthony?
Oui, merci. Je ne vais pas répéter ce qui a été dit là, c'est absolument pertinent. Il faut savoir que c'est documenté par l'UNESCO. Lorsque un journaliste a été tué, il reçoit des menaces avant, quasiment à chaque fois. Donc ce n'est pas le fruit du hasard, c'est rarement le fruit du hasard. Mais comme le disait Mathieu tout de suite, un mort est un mort, et c'est toujours terrible évidemment pour la victime, mais c'est aussi terrible pour ceux qui restent. Ta question sur l'AFP, sur les agences de presse, je vais répondre par l'AFP. Alors évidemment, la crise, etc., a mis à mal les grandes agences de presse, et on le voit, nous, avec nos organisations syndicales en interne. Mais ce qu'on constate surtout, et là je prendrai pour le coup l'exemple de l'agence France Presse, c'est qu'il y a un désengagement du gouvernement et des services publics pour financer les grandes agences de presse. C'est vrai pour Reuters également, et c'est vrai pour Associated Press. Et ce soutien public que tu appelles, ce soutien public large européen que tu appelles, pour moi est aussi une possibilité, une bonne solution, et probablement une réponse aussi à cette crise qui touche aussi les rédactions, parce que les rédactions, ces 20 dernières années, et moi je l'ai vécu dans les rédactions dans lesquelles j'ai travaillé en France pendant 18 ans, ont été vidés année après année. On a mis les anciens dehors et en barrant la porte aux jeunes. Donc à un moment donné, il y a moins de possibilités de faire son travail, de bien faire son travail, moins de possibilités pour vérifier son travail, et on fait des fautes. C'est aussi simple que ça. Alors effectivement, et le public déserte après les journaux. Ça, c'est la question. Je vais laisser Julie répondre sur ta question, Michel, sur Europe 1. Moi, juste pour donner une information, notre délégué syndical au sein d'Europe 1, dès que Bolloré est arrivé, il l'a foutu dehors. Voilà, ça, c'était une question, une réponse très rapide aux besoins de Bolloré de marquer son territoire à Europe 1, c'est de mettre dehors ceux qui l'empêchaient de tourner en rond. 40 ans d'ancienneté, dehors. Et donc voilà, donc il est clair que cette question de Bolloré, à la limite, la réponse, elle était quasiment dans ta question, si je puis dire.
Thank you very much. Julie.
Alors, je vais d'abord commencer par répondre sur la question du financement européen des agences de presse. Je pense qu'il est sans doute très important qu'au niveau de l'Union européenne, il y ait des règles, des critères pour que le financement public, mais des agences de presse... Pardon. Oui, donc moi je dirais plutôt que ce qui est important, c'est qu'il y ait des critères qui soient définis au niveau européen pour un financement juste, équitable, non discriminatoire, etc., mais pas seulement des agences de presse, pour toutes les subventions qui sont données aux médias, parce qu'il n'y a pas que les agences de presse qui reçoivent des subventions. Que ce soit un financement direct européen, il peut venir en plus, s'ajouter aux financements nationaux. J'avoue que là-dessus, je n'ai pas forcément une position très claire. Ce qui me semble important, et c'est qu'effectivement, il y ait des critères pour la distribution de ces financements, et je pense que ça serait important dans des pays voilà, où effectivement, en Pologne, en Hongrie, il y a une discrimination affolante des subventions. à travers notamment la publicité d'État. Et je pense que le projet de European Media Freedom Act que prépare la Commission devrait se pencher sur cette question. Ça me semblerait vraiment un sujet important à aborder. Sur la question de Bolloré, oh là 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 là. Oui, ce qui se passe en France avec Bolloré, le rachat d'Europe 1, de CNews avant, et voilà, cette mainmise est très inquiétante. Alors, c'est pas... On est encore loin de ce qui se passe en Pologne et en Hongrie, déjà parce qu'en Pologne et en Hongrie, c'est le gouvernement qui est derrière. Ici, on a un industriel qui, en fait, s'achète un média ou s'achète des médias pour les mettre à son idéologie, à sa vision, à son business, à ses propres intérêts. Et en plus, Bolloré, ce qu'il faut savoir, c'est que Bolloré, c'est le champion des procédures bâillons en France, des SLAP. C'est-à-dire que dès qu'un média, dès qu'un journaliste le critique ou va enquêter sur son business en Afrique, etc., hop, il attaque, ou en tous les cas, il menace d'attaquer en justice, des procédures qui durent indéfiniment, qui perdent en général d'ailleurs, mais ça n'empêche pas de continuer. Donc oui, c'est une figure très inquiétante. Alors, on a, à Reporters sans frontières, réussi à recueillir le témoignage de journalistes d'Europe 1, parce que beaucoup d'entre eux, en fait, le problème, c'est même pas que Bolloré les renvoie, c'est que les journalistes s'en vont d'eux-mêmes parce qu'ils ne veulent pas travailler dans une radio qui n'a plus d'indépendance. Donc ça aussi, c'est un problème, c'est qu'on n'est pas forcément face à des cas de renvoi. Enfin, on a fait un documentaire où on a recueilli des propos des journalistes qui sont... et ce documentaire a fait pas mal d'effets, et on l'a accompagné de recommandations, de 5 ou 6 recommandations sur ce qui est possible de faire, justement. Le principal axe, c'est de garantir l'indépendance des médias. Et le CSA a dans sa mission, donc le CSA, c'est le Conseil supérieur de l'audiovisuel française, a dans sa mission de faire respecter l'honnêteté, l'indépendance et le pluralisme de l'information sur la base des conventions actuelles. Et là, il y a sans doute un levier. L'autre point important aussi, mais qui est sans doute à plus long terme, c'est que on a une concentration importante des médias en France, ça c'est pas nouveau, et on a une loi qui est largement vieillotte et décalée, et donc il faudrait peut-être se repencher sur cette loi.
Thank you.
Voilà.
Thank you. Morten?
Well, I haven't had any questions, if I'm right, but I should just repeat my summarizing statement that despite all the circumstances, we are all optimistic, and I mean at Telex, where I come from, and we don't want to tell politicians, not even in our country, not for the European politicians, what to do with anything, with the media, let's say. Our job is to ask questions, write the truth, and this is our job, and this is what we are doing, and we have to make good stories to be alive and working. I mean, alive like an editorial. So this is what we do, and at the end, I hope that this will determine our future, not what politicians think or want to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Anders, you may have got more bad news, I see, on your phone there.
No.
No. Okay.
Thank God. It's half an hour of quite easy time. I'm nervous. Just finalizing, just a few remarks. You've asked about the young people. I'm not very optimistic. The construction of Polish national TV, this Polish TV, is, personal construction, is very easy. One is, let's say, a group of pragmatic journalists. I know such people. One of them was for years covering EU affairs. He was a correspondent in Brussels, and nowadays he's one of the face of anti-European propaganda, earning, I don't know, exact payments of journalists in Portugal, but in Poland, 15,000 euro a month plus bonuses. It's incredible high salary, and they received it. And the second group of people, they're young, inexperienced people who have no tools, no real experience, but they have, dedication to the propaganda. So one of the most important, the average age of the reporter in the main propaganda TV program, information program in Polish TV is, I believe, under 30. They do everything to be there and making propaganda. So I'm not optimistic. What's more, in Poland, the biggest organization, because Antony was asked, I believe, about that. In Poland, the biggest organization of journalists was also politically invaded by the Law and Justice, the ruling party. The journalists connected to the party took control over the biggest journalistic society in Poland called, Organization of Polish Journalists or something like that. So nowadays, when you hear discussions on the European level like this, me as a journalist, independent journalist, being here, every time I assume that it will be somebody, in the audience representing this organization, ready to fight with me. That's why, and also I am convinced that some of the people from the organization will look at the video taping of this conference, searching for some things to attack me and my company. So this is how it works. So I don't believe, in fact, that generation can have a real meaning. Second point is, I believe, I claim that European Union, on the European level, we should search for the salvation of fake news, because, and I want to stress it, because European level is very important. In Poland, there is a new idea. That's why I checked it on my telephone, because I want to be precise. Its new idea is like 2 or 3 days ago, that all the state-controlled, party-controlled institutions, they prepare law to fight with the fake news. But the problem is that for them, fake news is we. So I will try to explain you, to translate you the explanation that they will prepare. They prepare declaration for now, working on the new law in the future. Fighting with fake news and some news which are not very proper for young people, for children, and to teach people how the media works with the news and how news are prepared and what kind of influence formal capital on news can have. It's against us. And in Poland, foreign capital is a guarantee of freedom of the press. So that's why, for me, European level of law is much better than this political one. And final question, Małgorzata was asking that. I think Małgorzata asked Antony, but I will try to answer. If the idea, the idea is Western journalists or European journalists just don't take to governmental in Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland, claiming that you don't talk to your journalist in your country, so we don't talk to you. I wouldn't fight fire with fire. I wouldn't use their methods against them because simply I believe in freedom of the press. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you for coming here. And I want to thank you not especially for coming here, but for what you're doing every day and what you are doing as journalists for democracy, for freedom. Because, I mean, it's exactly, 30 years ago, some people thought that history has ended. What we understand, it's the contrary. The fight is going on, and that doesn't mean that we have to fight against those who are fighting us, but to fight for these freedoms, exactly what you have said. So I want to thank you very much. I want to thank you very much. I want to thank the organizers, and I give Gillian the word to conclude. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruno, and the panelists. I won't keep you much longer, just 1 or 2 minutes. I think we've learned it's important to dream over the last few days, but also it's important not to be asleep. And I think that we've really highlighted today the need for us to be awake to the threats that we face. I think you've highlighted them very well. I also think we should be honest that as the EESC, as the representatives of civil society organisations in the EU, we've also faced attacks and threats and lies and propaganda in the press about how we work and how we function by political interests who would prefer that independent civil society voices were not heard and were not part of the debate. And I think there we need to find strong allies in order to ensure that we maintain the freedom of civil society to have a voice in these debates. And there I see, as Seamus mentioned in his opening remark, a great chance to be allies with those in the media and the journalists, because we need you to be honest and open about the work that we do, and we need to use the privilege that we have within the institutions to offer support. So I hope that by organising this, that in some way that has been offering support and giving a voice to you, because we take very seriously the privilege that we've got thanks to the treaties and the fact that we exist as an institution in the first place. And we know that lies are seductive. I think that's the problem. Telling the truth is often not as attractive, and telling a lie can be very snappy and can get attention very quickly and be an easy route to success. And it's a difficult battle to fight, but I thank you on behalf of everyone for the continued work that you do, and to everybody for helping to make the last day and a half a success. I think we wanted to connect EU. We wanted to make a connection with all of you who are here. We wanted to make a real effort to make it physical, although we've broadcast this online. So we have the participants, you here and those online, to thank, of course, the Gulbenkian Foundation for hosting us, and the staff associated with them for your work, including the interpreters who've provided us the service of being able to understand each other, and the moderators and the panelists, of course, that we've had, as you've seen this morning. Thank you to Bruno and to all our guests for such strong engagement. But I must close by saying to you that there's a very good team here at the EESC that put together today, led by Ava. I won't go through you all by name because some of the team is here and some are still at home. So thank you. And of course, some of that team didn't travel with us, but they're following online and continuing the work. So we look forward to continuing the relationship that we started over the last few days. And I invite you to grab a lunch as you're leaving at the door, and of course, take the chance to interact and network with each other. Thank you a lot. Bye-bye.